They also, if you read the fine print here, though, they said if you take this offer, you cannot work for the federal government for 5 years. And one worker who would otherwise consider it said it just looked sketchy to them, and they're trying to take it in.
So where does all of this stand with the courts?
Well, there are dozens of lawsuits working through the courts, but I want to focus on one opinion that we heard last night from a federal judge in California. This is Northern California District Judge William Alsop. He gave an opinion that said these mass firings of these probationary workers is not lawful in his opinion. However, he's not blocking it yet. But when you talk to employment lawyers, they say this is a significant development.
It's really the first time where we've seen a court very clearly say that OPM is just acting outside of, there's no authority in the universe that gives OPM to be directing agencies to fire employees. And I think that determination is critical.
Trump sees this as executive power, OPM, the Office of Personnel Management.
And lastly, Lisa, I know you've been speaking with people, federal workers who've lost their jobs just this past week. What have they told you?
Right. You know, for workers, they are feeling obviously a lot of things, but the number one thing I heard from them is that they see this as bringing down a system that has taken generations to build up of merit-based experts across government who really just want to do their job and help America around the world. Now, when I talked to USAID workers yesterday, as they were taking their belongings out of the office, you could see collecting things from the headquarters where there's a lot of emotion there. So when you watch people there, the scene I witnessed there you see yesterday were people who've served around the world, some of them very emotional, some of them angry. You saw a lot of hugs as you see there. Others were more matter of fact about this and about what they think the United States is losing. I talked to this couple who's getting ready to get married. They both lost their jobs, and they say that this is a loss for them and the country.
What a lot of people are going to respond to your questions about are very wide-scale policy things. They're going to talk about Doge and limits of power and all of that. But at the end of the day, there are people in that building that are, crying, and very good people trying to do the right thing and were punished for it. And that's what's really hard about today.
Workers I'm talking to are kind of tough. They're not whiny people, but one said they feel harassed and hunted.
Lisa Desjardins, thanks so much for this important reporting.
Welcome.
As Lisa mentioned, hundreds of staff have been laid off at NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. That includes employees of the National Weather Service, and that's behind forecasts and severe weather alerts across the country. It also provides crucial data for scientists and meteorologists. To help us understand the potential impact, we're joined now by science correspondent Miles O'Brien. Miles, it's always great to see you. I have to say the National Weather Service is one of those things we almost take for granted, and there are other weather services out there. So why is this one so important?
It is easy to take for granted, Amna, almost invisible in some ways, but it is truly the backbone of all weather forecasting in this country. It's freely available to all. Airlines, first responders, farmers, fishermen all depend on these forecasts. They also issue crucial warnings for hurricanes, tornadoes, floods, even tsunamis. And there are many services out there that add bells and whistles to this raw data, but they would be lost without the National Weather Service. Matthew Capucci is a senior meteorologist for one of those private services, MyRadar.
Anytime your phone buzzes with a watch, a warning, a tornado warning, a flash flood warning, that comes from the National Weather Service. People sitting there watching the radar nonstop and producing forecasts as well. It's estimated that the Weather Service costs taxpayers about $1.3, $1.4 billion, but gives a 50-plus fold return on investment given how much of the economy is tied to weather forecasts.
Miles, there are already cuts in personnel and expertise being made. There's some people posting about routine weather balloon in Alaska, for example, that's not going up. How important is that?
The weather balloon in Alaska story is an interesting one. It seems sort of inconsequential, but it's crucial. That's an important part of the world for the weather. It's where cold air and warm air combine. Satellites are limited there because of the cloud cover. And balloons provide data which satellites can't. They do temperature, humidity, and pressure as they rise up. And everything they learn there feeds the forecasts for the rest of North America. Here's more from Matt Capucci.
Imagine going to bed not knowing if a tornado is coming your direction, but you're relying on these warnings that come from the National Weather Service. Now imagine that office is short-staffed, they might not have enough people watching enough things all at once, and suddenly warning quality is degraded. That has real-life implications that could, of course, in some cases, be very dire.
So, Miles, these firings are all part of the government's efforts, it says, to cut bloat. Is there bloat to cut at the National Weather Service?
Sure. The National Weather Service has 122 forecast offices, 13 regional centers, 9 national centers. They're all looking at the weather. There's a lot of duplication in all of that. But this is something that cries out for more of a scalpel than a sledgehammer in this case. And particularly in this case, the probationary workers, in some cases, these are workers who are have a lot of experience and are transitioning to a new job in a probationary mode. But also importantly, young people, which are the lifeblood of these organizations, are obviously the probationary workers. And as you look toward weather forecasting system that requires fewer people using artificial intelligence and other technology, it's precisely these young people that you want to have working for you, Amna.
Science correspondent Miles O'Brien. Miles, it's always great to see you. Thank you so much.
You're welcome, Amna.
From visits with heads of state to further restrictions on the press corps, we now turn to the analysis of Brooks and Capehart. That is New York Times columnist David Brooks and Jonathan Capehart, associate editor for the Washington Post. Great to see you both.
Yeah, no.
So you were both watching, of course, everything at the White House today in the meeting between Presidents Trump and Zelensky. We've talked about it a lot today, but I do want to play for you a little bit of the interview we know President Zelensky gave soon after that meeting. He sat down with Fox News and Bret Baier, and Baier asked him if Zelensky thought that the public spat there served Ukraine in any way. Here's what Zelensky said.
I mean, this is not good for both sides anyway, and I'm very open, but I can't, change our Ukrainian attitude to Russia, and I don't want they kill us for us. This is very, very clear that Americans are the best of our friends, Europeans are the best of our friends, and Putin with Russian, their enemies. And it doesn't mean that we don't want peace. We just want to recognize the reality.
Jonathan, what did you think when you were watching this unfold in the White House? And what do you make of the way Zelensky's talking about it now?
I thought the low point for America on the world stage was the Trump-Putin press conference in Helsinki in 2017, when the President of the United States sided with the president of Russia against his own national intelligence apparatus. What we saw in the Oval Office was the travesty, horrendous, despicable. There aren't any words to describe what we watched, where we saw a vice president who's never been to Ukraine lecture a wartime president who was clearly summoned to the White House to humiliate him on the world stage, either on behalf of or for the benefit of Vladimir Putin in Russia. And look, I give President Zelensky major points for standing up for himself, for standing up for his nation, and standing up for his people. He is in there fighting for America's backing, which, I'm sorry, it should not even be in doubt, given the stakes that are involved and who he is trying to protect his people from.
David, from that Helsinki meeting in 2018 to this meeting today, what do you make of it?
I'll stick with today. I have enough to say about today. I was nauseated. I just nauseated. All my life I've had a certain idea about America, that we're a flawed country, but we're fundamentally a force for good in the world. That we defeated Soviet Union, we defeated fascism, we did the Marshall Plan, we did PEPFAR to help people live in Africa, and we make mistakes, Iraq, Vietnam, but they're usually mistakes out of stupidity, naivete, and arrogance. They're not because we're ill-intentioned. What I've seen over the last 6 weeks is the United States behaving vilely to our friends in Canada and Mexico, vilely to our friends in Europe, and today was the bottom of the barrel. Vilely to a man who is defending Western values at great personal risk to him and his countrymen. Donald Trump believes in one thing. He believes that might makes right. And in that he agrees with Vladimir Putin, that they are birds of a feather. And he and Vladimir Putin together are trying to create a world that's safe for gangsters, where ruthless people can thrive. And we saw the product of that effort today in the Oval Office. And at first I was thinking, am I feeling grief? Am I feeling shock, like I'm in a hallucination? But I just think shame, moral shame. It's a moral injury to see the country you love behaving this way.
You heard Congressman Lawler, who would not criticize the president necessarily, but as a Ukraine supporter, say we're further away from a deal. They have to get back to a deal. The war has to end. You also heard Nick Schifrin report earlier, his European sources are saying there's a fundamental transatlantic break now. Is this the realignment, Jonathan? Has this happened? The U.S. is now closer to Russia than to its European allies?
Undisputed. Yes. Yes. And the fact that the Europeans are already looking at it as a break, I think they have to do that. They can't depend on the United States now. After what happened to President Zelensky in the Oval Office, what happens to the Baltic states? What happens to Estonia if Russia rolls over the border? What happens to Poland if Russia rolls over the border? What happens if any of the NATO countries are attacked by Russia after what we just saw? They cannot depend on the United States anymore after more than 7 decades. I'm sure the Europeans are probably even more in shock than we are at this table. And I'm glad you used the word gangster, because that was the thing when President Trump got into it with President Zelensky. You don't have any cards. Without us, you have no deal. That was gangster rule there. And between him and the vice president, it also felt like watching a wrestling match where Vance jumps in the ring and then taps in the president, and then they gang up on a man who is literally fighting for the survival of his country.
David, is there a way to get any kind of deal back on track? Is there a way to repair what was clearly broken today?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, Trump is transactional. He'll bash people, he'll hate people, and then he will do a deal. We've seen that in the past. I just wonder where his values are. If he clearly has a thing for Vladimir Putin. We've seen that for 8 years. And he's not going to lean on Putin. He's going to side with Putin, as Timothy Snyder said today. And so maybe that's just his belief system. And J.D. Vance has a value system, which is a belief in performance art. What he did was not the act of someone who is a diplomat. It was not the act of someone who's a statesman. It was not the act of someone who has a famous hint of responsibility to edge on his president, to just try to do a mano against a man who's 10 times the man he is, frankly. So there's a lot to overcome. But I do think it's got to be in America's interest not to let Vladimir Putin take over Ukraine. Surely everybody sees that. And so I have some hope there'll still be a possibility for a deal somehow.
We did hear in that exchange at the end, President Trump, as it was sort of coming to a close, he said, well, this is going to be great television. Sort of acknowledged this is all unfolded on live television for the entire world to see. And for better or worse, this is a president who really understands the power of the media and how to harness it and how to leverage it. And I know we've talked about some of the changes before, his continued attacks on the press, blocking the AP's access from some White House coverage as well. You saw him the White House take control of the press pool that covers the president full time, make sure everyone else knows what's happening with the president. Peter Baker, of course, longtime Russia correspondent, said it reminded him of the Kremlin press pool takeover. And I just want to get your takes on where that sort of attack on the press stands and whether we're in much more sinister territory now.
I do think we're in more sinister territory because you've got to look at what's happening with AP. In light of his lawsuits against CBS, against ABC, threats threatening the licenses of other broadcast entities, this is all part of a pattern of roughing up anyone he views as not either insufficiently loyal or people who have wronged him. And he looks at the press as an entity that has wronged him. But what I would say is, it's sort of inside baseball that, AP is not allowed in the pool, which means they can't get into all these places. To me, it just says that the White House press corps, which already does hard work, they're just going to have to work a little bit harder, reporting on an administration that already leaks like a sieve.
David?
Yeah, I mean, Donald Trump does everything he can to destroy things that would restrain his power. And so that's the attorney generals he fires, that's the inspector generals, that's the JAG officers, that's the leadership of the military who doesn't like. And the press is a potential restraint on his power. And so he is trying to dismantle the idea of the press. And if I could bash the press a little, or at least the owner of Jonathan's newspaper, we're helping. Jeff Bezos, when he says we're gonna have an opinion section in the Washington Post that does not brook dissent, that's just not journalism. And I've seen this again from entrepreneurs who say, why would you publish something you disagree with? They just don't get it, some people. That's what we do. That's what democracy is. Your loyalty to democracy is higher than your loyalty to one ideology or another. And so the idea that we're going to have a major newspaper that doesn't publish dissent, that can't be.
David Brooks, Jonathan Capehart, thank you both for being here, for engaging always. We appreciate you.
Thanks, Son.